Okay, so welcome to our Literature at Lunch meeting roundtable. We're literally at a roundtable here at Congregation Agudat Shalom in the Bennett Simcha Room, which is beautifully remodeled. We have food catered in from 6:13. They've given us extra food. We have participants sitting, and I know that we have some people that are trying to log in. They came in, I saw their name as participants, they left, and they're having a hard time coming in. I don't understand the glitch, but I will let them in as soon as I see their name. So I want to bring this up to date where we are in terms of this roundtable. Started 5 years ago with Rabbi Kurtz, and we started with, it was originally called Literature Meets Torah, or Literature at Lunch. We started with The Lottery with Shirley Jackson, which basically covered the idea of human sacrifice to ensure an abundant crop. We did The Man Who Brings Rain Clouds, written by Leslie Marmon Silko, where we spoke about a Native American culture that had been subjugated and into the greater culture, greater Christian culture, how they were trying to maintain their individuality and lack the respect of the missionaries. It was a very moving. And then we did The Necklace, Guy de Maupassant last summer, which was about a town which is completely corrupt and trying to bring sanity and morality where bribery and thievery is the name of the day. And last week we did Radio. Now, Radio is a short poem that appeared in the New Yorker magazine, March 20th, 23. I think it's March 27th, written by Diane di Prima. And Diane, as I explained last week, is a Brooklyn-born New York native who wound up as a beatnik in San Francisco, along with Allen Ginsberg and Jack Kerouac. And she wrote a poem, very short poem called Radio. And basically, Radio introduces the idea of some mysticism in our culture. The idea that when a child is conceived, before it's conceived, there is an angel, Layla, who at the summons of God picks out a soul, put in the womb, and Layla comes, puts the soul in the womb, educates the soul in Torah, gives wisdom and understanding, and shows it the life it would leave if it lives a very moral life, and shows the opposite, the Gehenna, the Sheol, as we say, that would await it if it is lives a very corrupt life. So, and the idea that we took away from Radio was the fact that the poet questions the fact that if the angel that implants the soul then puts his finger on right above the lips of the child, and the child forgets everything, okay? Forgets all the Torah it learned, forgets the prior life, if we can include that, and then comes into this life like a clean slate. And so she's protesting. It's a protest poem. She's saying, why is it that when this is all supposed to happen, why am I hearing voices, radio voices from a prior life? What she's saying is, why do I have to live a life that was lived prior to mine? And I think she's intimating that's her grandfather, who was an anarchist and was a cohort of Emma Goldman. And it seems as if she would have loved to have come into this life with a clean slate. Instead, she's coming in inheriting some genetic, some cultural aspects from her grandfather, my family. So that's where we are as we come into the Intimations of Immortality, written by Wordsworth. I also want to mention that in the arc of Judaic calendar, in the arc of the calendar, we're now 41 days into the counting. There's a 49-day cycle between the second day of Passover and the 50th day, the Pentecost, which is Shavuot, the Festival of Weeks. Right now we're 41. So the idea of this holiday as a background to what we're studying is the fact that each day you're supposed to study a segment of the ethics of the fathers, and it's a way of elevating. Again, this is a mystical concept the rabbis added, that there are 49 steps to heaven, if you will. And once you get to heaven, there are then 49 steps down to Gehenna, to hell. So right now, supposedly we're on the 41st step, and we know that Shavuot celebrates on the second day of Passover. We just crossed the sea. We had no Torah. We just had Moses as our leader, and God extending his hand and getting us through the Red Sea, and we're full of miracles. Yeah, one sec, let me finish. And then we wait 49 days, and then we receive Torah. So that's where we are right now. We're in the process of stepping up to receive a higher level of understanding. Go ahead, Ruth, you have a question.
The question is, if you achieve, you die and achieve, and you've been very good, and what's the word you used anyway, how could you then possibly descend to hell?
Well, again, this is a philosophical question. I mean, who sends you? I mean, look, what we're trying to do here is not look at the end of life. Let's look at the beginning of life, because that's where radio starts at the beginning. She's talking about the womb, and the same thing, the ode on Intimations, basically, I had you guys, one of the questions I posed was, let's look at the first three lines, and keep it in mind, we're not going to answer it right now, but we need to keep that in the framework of whatever we are able to discuss today. And there's much more here than we'd be able to cover, but I just want to get into the crux of what this great poet, William Wordsworth, is struggling with, because that's what he's struggling with. Every piece of literature that we have read this year is a struggle to reach out to a greater force beyond yourself. Because man does not live for himself, doesn't live by bread alone. There's a higher purpose in life. And that's basically what is intriguing me about this long poem. And it was only the radio, when I saw that in the New Yorker, that got me so excited that I could then segue into this much longer poem, which is much more difficult to understand. So that's where we're at. Now, the first three lines, I'm going to ask, Ruth, you came first. Okay, why don't you read the first three lines at the top, the child. Yeah. Yeah, no, we're talking the Intimations. Intimations.
Yeah, no, wait a minute.
Yeah.
This one?
Yeah, at the top, it says.
Yeah. The child is the father of the man, and I could wish my days to be bound each too early.
To each.
Wait a minute, bound each to each by natural
Piety.
right.
Piety. Okay, so these are really difficult words. I don't want to explain them now, but I want to keep it in mind. Is what does he mean that this child is father to the man? That goes against all reason and logic. The man gets experience, and so the man, in a sense, educates this naive child, and so the man gives learning and understanding and experience how to deal in the real world. But yet he's saying that, contrary to that logic, the child is father to the man, which implies that we have to understand why child is so important and what does it mean by natural piety. Natural piety these 3 lines from an earlier poem called My Heart Leaps Up. He's looking at a rainbow and he just gets carried away, feeling the great universe. He's part of a greater scheme of things. And he's connecting to a higher source. That's basically what that's all about.
It's a child's innocence. It hasn't had the experience of growing up, of growing up, and having to combat various things. It's
Yes.
almost a pure state.
Yes, I totally agree. So let's find out why the child is father to the man. Now, this is an 11th stanza poem.
Yeah.
I had you guys look at stanza 5, and I'm going to bring it up here. Let me just see here. Why do I have this up here? I don't want it. Get rid of that. All right, so we're going to stanza 5. You have it on your sheets, and it is, all right, ode. All right, now I'm going to the screen and putting it on the screen. And stanza 5 begins with, our birth is but a sleep. All right, let us turn to
5.
yeah, 5, okay, which begins with all right, and okay, so Stuart, you are up. Let me just get it on here. Our birth is but a would you wait a second. As a creatures, our birth, what did I say? Birth is but a sec. I'll locate our birth. Our birth. Okay, we're here now. Okay, so you're going to read the first 1, 2, 3, the first 4 lines. Go ahead, Stuart. Our birth.
Our birth is but a sleep and a forgetting. The soul that rises with us, our life star, hath had elsewhere its setting.
And one more
cometh
line.
From afar.
Okay. Now, this is very puzzling. What does it mean? Our birth is but a sleep and a forgetting. Now, remember that in the radio poem, she complains, and you got somehow she forgotten to forget. You know, she forgot to forget. The problem was that as she was being born, she was supposed to be stripped of all memory, and then the angel that was in charge of removing all of the prior knowledge that was transmitted to this fetus in the womb forgot to remove everything. And so there is a remnant of a prior life. In other words, we can't get away from who we were, who our parents were, what our genetic background is. That's what's implied here. So our birth is but a sleep, okay? All right, we know that. You know, we're in the womb for 9 months, so it's a sleep, right? And a forgetting, in other words. And so it seems as if Wordsworth is in agreement with the rabbinic idea that we are born forgetting Torah. We were taught it, now we forgot it, okay? The soul that rises with us, our life star, okay, so we know that we all have a neshama when we're born, and that's our life star, had elsewhere its setting, and cometh from afar. All right, now, what Wordsworth is saying here is that we have lived a prior existence, okay? How do we know that? Because we know that this life star finished off somewhere else, that this soul was connected to another source, and it's set somewhere else, and when that life finished, and somehow the soul was transferred to this new life, You see what I'm saying? This is a very, it's a concept that is in Judaism. It's
My
called,
question is this, since there is, I've met you, the neshama is recycled. And I think the purpose of, what's the light? The purpose of it is that one does not want the baby, when it's born, should not remember anything of the previous life that this neshama was in. Okay, maybe it was not a very good life. In other words, I've read that neshama is recycled because it hasn't fulfilled its purpose. So it comes into another thing. So hopefully, when you marry, the two neshamas help each other to reach.
the
And I
idea
think-
being, yeah,
You
you're getting into the heart of the matter. That this is the idea of Plato, very famous philosopher, had this idea that we have had a prior existence,
Yeah,
pre-existence, and it's called metempsychosis or transmigration of souls, that the soul is transferred from one prior existence to the new one. So Abraham goes to Yitzchak, and Yitzchak goes to Yaakov, and so forth, okay? And Yaakov to his 12 sons. Now, this is very interesting that in the Gevurot prayer, I brought these prayer books out for you guys to look at, and that if you open it up, you will see that what inspired me was the idea of Gevurot. Okay, the Amidah is 18 blessings. The blue will tell you where to open up to. The blue, the first blue, which is on page 99, page 99. And the idea is that we say 2 times in the Amidah, V'neman ata lechiot metim, Baruch atah Adonai mechayim metim. So that means that you are faithful, God, to give life to those who have died. Blessed are you, God, who recreates the neshama, recreates the soul. So that's 1 time, and you turn the page again to the second page, and you will see that again it says, "V'neman atalach metim, baruch atah baruch atah mechayeh metim." So it's mentioned 2 times in the second prayer of the Amidah, which is called Gevurot, which means strength. This is God's strength. Okay, so this is where the seed, shall we say, of all this discussion in Judaism, this is where it begins. And these prayers we know were made by the scholars of the post-Ezra cycle, when the Jews came back to Jerusalem after the Babylonian exile. They wrote the prayers, and this is what was included in the prayers. These are the rabbis of the Great Assembly. There were 70 rabbis that got together, and they decided what put into prayer, what to put on the cutting room floor, and this is what they put in. Okay, so all right, so let us continue. So it's my turn. So I'm going to continue where Stuart left. Okay, let me go to number 5. Okay, okay, now I'm continuing. This is the top of the next page. Not in entire forgetfulness and not in utter nakedness, but trailing clouds of glory do we come from God, who is our home. Heaven lies about us in our infancy. These lines just blow my mind every time, first time I read it, whenever I look at it. And look, not an entire forgetfulness. We come into this world with some baggage. That's what it's saying. We're carrying baggage from a prior existence, because you can't completely, like she says in radio, I wish you guys forgot to forget. You forgot to turn it off. The radio is still there. They're still playing the same melodies I'm hearing my grandfather saying, down with the government, up with women's rights. So, and he said, we come in not in entire and not in utter nakedness. In other words, the child is somewhat closed, and what he's saying is the child is not so innocent as you think he is. This child has got chachma, he's got some chachma, got some understanding of life, and he's not saying he's an adult already. He's got a prior existence that he has to deal with. So don't tell me that he comes in so innocent, because Wordsworth is saying somewhere he is not so innocent.
Yeah.
But then he says, but trailing clouds of glory do we come from God, who is our home. In other words, the little infant, the child comes in, he's saying that is the closest that the human will ever be to God, to Hashem. That's what he's saying. He's saying when you are coming out of the womb, that is you're trailing clouds of glory. I mean, you can't get any better. And that means that you are a partner, you're part of God, and you are not a part of this world of physicality, of experience. Okay. Here, heaven lies about us in our infancy. He's saying, as a child, you are closest to heaven. You cannot get any closer. You don't need tefillah. You don't need prayer. You are there. You are one with a higher source. That's what he's saying here.
Now,
Now,
the infant, not the infant, the embryo, whatever, it gets its nourishment. It doesn't have, it just has to enjoy itself. It has no obligations. So it's really, it's no worries about this or not. Or it's going to be fed on time, or it's going to change on time. You know, think about it. Or it's an ideal.
it is an ideal, and that's what he's saying.
He's out. I don't know. I enjoy it.
Wordsworth is a part of what we call English Romanticism. This was a group of poets, including Coleridge, Samuel Taylor Coleridge, Ronald the Ancient Mariner, as we all read sometime in high school, that you are closest to the universe, meaning to the higher source, when you are one with nature. And when one with nature, they're defining is when you are an infant, you are at one. You don't know any of the worries of the world. You are smiling most of the time. And of course, you got the baby's going to cry and whatever. But the baby, the innocence of the child, puts the child in the highest level. And that's what these romantics were trying to create in this life, a life of a prior of the child coming out. That's what they try to create, a more perfect union, if you will, more perfect existence. Now, we're back to Stuart. We're starting with shades.
Shades of the prison house begin to close upon the growing boy, but he beholds the light, and whence it flows, he sees it in his joy.
All right, we stop over there. Okay. Shades of the prison house begin to close. Whoa.
Material world coming about you, closing you off from your spirituality, perhaps?
Yeah, he will define this to a greater degree in the poem, but shades of the prison house, he's basically implying that life here becomes more and more intolerant, more and more far. You're getting farther and farther away from source, your source, which is the oneness of Hashem. And this life is like a prison. Why? We have what is happening here? Like you say, you become so absorbed in material things. You become absorbed in. He talks about in the poem. You become absorbed in funerals, people dying around you. You become absorbed with illness. You become absorbed with schooling and failing exams, and parents hitting you and abusing you, and so life becomes a diminishment of light. Life becomes of that original light. That's what he's saying. So it's like we're in a prison house here, that this life, and that's what he is, like she's protesting her life. She's a protester about the life that she's entering, that she's coming in as a protester, and she's protesting that, which is, it's beautiful. I love that idea. Okay, and so he's protesting that too. He says, you know, how much of this ideal life do we have? It's very short. As soon as we're born, we enter a prison. You know, we have people looking over us, and they tell us what to do. We can't be natural.
But it's also, as you grow older, you should assume responsibility. But in this culture right today, forget about it. You understand? So the prison, in a sense, you gotta work, you gotta produce. And so to people, it's a prison to work. They just wanna lay back and have their fentanyl.
Well, you know,
You understand? So in a sense, work to them is a prison. But you see, work is not a prison. It's wonderful if you can work.
you're getting to the next part of the poem. You're ahead of yourself, okay? But let me just finish on with what Stuart touched upon. So he says, this growing boy, he beholds the light and whence it flows. That means that as you grow up, you realize that you came from a higher source. You know that life has had to be better than parents telling you everything, when you got to eat, when you got to go to sleep, when you got to go to school. Yeah, you can only wear these clothing. You can't do this. You got to go to shul on Shabbos, you know, this and that. Okay. But he beholds the light. Now, it's this growing boy still understands that he comes from this pure light, and whence it flows, he sees it in his joy. Like our good friend Ruth is saying, is that you can find joy here and now in what you're working. When you are in the field that you're supposed to be doing, you get a lot of joy. You're a teacher, and most teachers are at a higher level than just going to Wall Street and making money, than punching a clock and having to work in a factory, you know, changing parts on an assembly line. But this child knows joy. That, you know, it's not, you don't lose it all. That's what he's saying. You don't lose it. You still have some joy here and now. Okay. You're on, Ruth, starting with the youth. The youth, where it says the youth.
The youth who daily furthest from the sea east must travel still as nature's priest, and by the vision splendor is on his way attended.
Okay, so the youth who daily farther from the east. Now, what does the east represent? The east, what comes with it every day in the east? The sun.
Well,
the sun
rises in
the sun. So that's what's implied here. The youth who daily farther from the east. Now look, the child began with pure sunlight, right? That's what he's saying. The child is one-on-one with light and divinity and understanding. And now as the child grows up, he moves further and further from that original light, from the sun, from the east. Okay, so must travel. So this kid has got to get experience. It's got to know what life is all about, all its ups and its downs. Still is nature's priest. What does he mean by that? This child is still nature's priest, and by the vision splendid is on his way attending. Go ahead, Ruth. What, I know you have some thoughts on this. The child must travel, and he is still nature's priest. What is Wordsworth trying to say, Beth?
It's a cycle. And sometimes when you've achieved certain things in life and you want to go on, but then Hashem says you can't.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's very frustrating. There's sometimes you have work or ideas or certain to complete and you don't have time.
Okay, so how does that make you nature's priest? How can you remain nature's priest when you can't really do what you want to do? mean, that's what he's struggling with here. I agree with you. I agree with you.
You can't, in other words, it's not an idealistic thing. Everything you want on time, you can't do that. There's
Okay.
many forces that work
You've got the
against-
baggage of life. That's what you're
Right.
saying.
What,
Okay.
what's the old expression? Stop and smell the roses every so often.
Okay. So smell the roses. Good. So along the way, Stuart's getting to it. You still have the ability to relate to the roses, to nature, to light, to harmony, to the universe, the beautiful stars, the sky, the moon, the sun rising. The sun also rises every day. Ernest Hemingway.
A lot of people are so hung up with, I don't know what, on cell phones. They don't walk and see nature, the trees, the budding of the trees, the smell of flowers, the animals coming. I mean, and I get up in the morning, I see the beautiful 6-8 stories trees and the deer and everything, and life is beginning to emerge and so forth. But
So-
people don't look. They're so wound up in their
So what
own
you're
self.
saying along your travels, you are in a sense reflecting, you are nature's priest. You are like a reflection of the beauty around you. You see it every day, even though you have to get on the phone and deal with doctors and
Right,
lawyers,
right.
but you're still nature's priest. That means that you're still connected to your source. That's what he's saying here.
Also, the wonders of learning things. Like I mentioned about this program, how the use was great. And with the Big Bang, in not even seconds, everything was in place. And I said, oh my God, it's unbelievable. I'm not I don't have a high degree in these things, but it's unbelievable. There's, when you think about it, I'm walking 40 minutes, I'm listening to do it in the morning. And God Almighty, concepts and things, it's so people don't look and see what's going on in the world.
So what you're saying is that the vision that he says you are capable of, and you do it every morning, you get up, you see the beautiful home that you have in nature.
They're blinded, they're walking in the world, and they don't understand God's creations and the beauty of
Exactly.
this thing.
Exactly. What he's saying is that you have the potential as someone who came from the East, and you're moving further away from the East, but you have the potential to reconnect every day and know where you're beginning, where you began from. And you are then well attended. You are on your way attended with this vision splendid. You still have this vision every day, even though you are.
It's very interesting.
Yeah.
Is that in the East, the sun always rises. Okay. And the Egyptian, the very important god, was Ra. It was the sun god. So when you mentioned about the East, I kept on thinking about what they felt was a god,
Sure.
And of course, it was one of the 10 plagues was
Darkness.
Of course, that was a front
That was
to
that was an affront. That was a knockout punch. A knockout punch.
Yeah, so that's why you mentioned about the East. I kept on thinking, about that. And it was Western, in the West, it's sunsets glorious, it's unbelievable. Yeah.
We're on 5. In other words, I have 2 lines for myself. At length, the man perceives it die away and fade into the light of common day. Oh, how sad. Like we've been all saying here, Stuart saying, we smell the roses, and Ruth smells the roses in the morning. She gets up and sees at one with the universe. But what happens at length, as man moves further and further from the east, okay, he perceives it die away. It gets fainter and fainter as light gets more and more complicated with details, the here and that, and fade into the light of common day. In other words, the common day's light is so diminished in its intensity that we forget where we come from. That's the whole point he's making. We forget where we come from.
Well, I tell you, it's very, you gotta have a certain attitude in life. Every time I go to doctor, what, how old are you? So I tell them how old I am. I say, I'm 86 years young. They don't expect this. I'm a baby. I'm still exploring the world and ideas and things.
I have an appointment coming up, but I do want to mention this, that I have a screen here, which those that could have come on would see, but I'll tell you what I've done here. I did research into the idea of transmigration of souls in our Judaic history. Where does it come from? It doesn't say in the Torah anything about, it's called Gilgulim. It means that we go the cycle of going around and around and around, Gilgulim. Now, I'm not getting into Buddhist culture because they have the idea of, again, the karma going around and around. But here, this is what I got from Safaria. The first time in Jewish history, Gilgulim are introduced, that's transmigration, is with the Rav Sadia Gaon. Now, this Gaon, you lived about 900 to 1,000 of the Common Era. From the article, What Judaism Says About Reincarnation by Rabbi Louis Jacobs, one can read the development of the concept of Gilgulim. Now, this is what the Sadia Gaon, he was the prime thinker, the chief rabbi, the go-to rabbi of his generation. Yes, I must say that I found certain people who call themselves Jews professing the doctrine of metempsychosis. Again, that's the transfer of souls, which is designated by them as the theory of transmigration of souls. What they mean thereby is that the spirit of Reuben is transferred to Simeon, and afterwards to Levi, and afterwards to Judah. These names are generic, like Tom, Dick, and Harry. No reference to the sons of Jacob is intended. Okay. Many of them would even go so far as to assert that the spirit of human being might enter into the body of a beast, or that a beast into the body of a human being, and other such nonsense and stupidities. Okay, the people that supported and believed in Gilgulim were the Kabbalists and the Hasids. The Zohar has a lot of commentary based on this. Okay, I wanted to finish with this idea because I don't think we're finished with this. I certainly will find out why these other three people that are so devoted to the class were not able to come on, and I'm going to edit this for them, and we'll hopefully have a continuation of our session the next time. And I want to thank you for your input, because this, more than any other session that I've had the privilege of leading, is so full of meaning and richness about life, how to lead a good life. How can you lead a good life when you're surrounded by all this materialism and all this the pressure, other people? You're living in a charnel, you're living in a jailhouse. You can't be yourself. When do you find time to be yourself, Ruth? And Ruth finds time. We know that. She finds time. Ruth, you're amazing. You are a blessing. Yeah, and I'm going to have to stop my recording now. All right, stop recording.